Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 174. We are in one of the more unique periods of the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, where we're leaving the saddest time of the year, the time of grief and mourning, which is the 9 days and the 3 weeks, concluding with Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And we're about to come this Monday to Tu B'Av. Tonight, actually, the 15th of Av, which is, as the Mishnah says, Lo Yehoy Yom Tevim L'Yisrael. There were no such great holidays by Israel like Tu B'Av, Hachnasas Orchim, and Yom Kippurim, like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. Imagine equating the 15th of Av with Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, everybody knows it. Hachnasas Orchim, for many, is an obscure day. Many don't even know what happened then. The Gemara goes on to elaborate the events that happened. But to equate these two seems strange. But therein lies one of the secrets and the most eloquent and powerful mysteries of navigating through life and the cycles of life. With a short preface, according to Chassidus explains that time in Judaism is not linear. Zman is not linear. It's not like a river of time with the past behind us, the present here, and the future ahead down the river. It's actually more like a cycle or a spiral, even better. As the Chassidus brings, the Rebbe brings it very often from the Arizal, Hayomim ha'elam niskarim v'nasim, from the Megillah and Purim, that these days are niskarim v'nasim. It should have said, Hayom ha'elam niskarim, these days are remembered, are commemorated. Nasim comes to add, they're not just commemorated, but Nasim, they're recreated. Because time travels like a cycle, and that's why we have the 7 days of the week, and we begin again a cycle of 7. We don't continue counting after 7 days. Why not continue? 8, 9, 10, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, 49, etc. Why do we break and start again from number 1 as Ayas L'Kut Torah? So, from a secular point of view, you could answer the question is because, for practical purposes, people need a weekend. So you need to make a break somewhere, so that's an artificial break at the end of 7 days. As a matter of fact, when they created the metric system, everything is in tens, and they mock Americans for not following the metric system, which is so symmetrical, everything in the number 10. They also wanted to create 10 days of the week. But that was not acceptable for the obvious reason. People couldn't work, even today, even 5 days a week, 4 days a week, 4 work days. But from a Torah, Chassidus, and Kabbalah perspective, based on the Zohar that says, on the Pasuk, Sheishis Yomim Asa Hashem L'Kechas Hashemayim V'Sa'aretz, should have said, B'Sheishis Yomim. Literally translated, it says, 6 days God created heaven and earth. In English, you say, in 6 days, or in Hebrew, B'Sheishis Yomim. During the interim, during the period of 6 days. Why does it say Sheishis Yom? The Zohar answers, Kol Yema V'Yema Oved Avidata. Because Sheishis Yom also is not just within the 6 days existence was created, but the 6 days themselves were created. So the Osa goes on the Sheishis. 6 days God created. He created a Sunday, which is Kol Yem. Every day has its energy, has its power, has its mission, so to speak, has its job description. Literally, Kol Yema V'Yema Oved Avidata. What's the job description of Sunday? Chesed. What's the job description of Monday? Oved Avidata. Gevura. And so on through the 7 divine attributes, which reflect and evolve into the 7 human faculties, emotional faculties. So each day has its energy. And that's the cycle of time. Chesed through Malchus. Malchus is Shabbos. What happens after Malchus? The cycle begins again. And reverse to Kol Yem Oved Avidata, the 7th, the cycle or spiral, because it's on a different plane and a different axis, but the same orbit that every week repeats itself. And that's why birthdays and holidays and Rosh Hashanah and every significant day, we're not just remembering a birthday that happened a period of time ago, or Rosh Hashanah that happened 5,777 or will be 778 years. We're actually recreating everything that happened. Everything that happened reverts back to its original. Your birthday every year is a time when that orbit returns to that point when your soul came down to your body. With that short preface, you can understand so many different ways, so many far-reaching implications about the meaning of time, the significance of time, and how it relates to our lives. And namely, in our context, that this period in time, as we go from the sadness of Tisha B'Av to the happiness and simcha of Tu B'Av, reflects an energy. What's the energy of this period? The ability to repair after something is broken. In one word, hope. The ability to correct things that were lost, dreams that were shattered, promises that were broken, betrayals, violations. So much of our lives are defined by the wounds and the pains that we've endured. This period teaches us that we have the ability to rebuild. So if Tisha B'Av is the loss of dignity, the loss of Malchus, the destruction both on the collective and the personal level of Malchus, as Chassidus and Kabbalah puts it, so Tu B'Av is the repair and the aliyah of Malchus, and that's how the Arizal explains why this is such a great holiday. The technical reasons and the historical reasons are explained in the Gemara, but the Pnimi is the real deeper reason behind it all, is as the Arizal says, why should Tu B'Av be the greatest holiday? Full moon. Every month has a full moon. And that's why we indeed have holidays. Pesach is on the full moon. Sukkot is on the full moon. Purim is on the full moon. So what makes Tu B'Av, 15th of Av, unique? So he says because the Shvira, the Yerida, Plois, the tremendous descent and destruction was in Malchus. We'll call it dignity. That's the destruction of the temple. And therefore, Yerida Tzerech Aliyah, every descent is in order to bring to a greater ascent. So the fact that the full moon that follows Tisha B'Av is a far different type of full moon than any other, because no one had to endure such pain. And pain always has to bring L'fum Saida Agra something even greater to justify, and more importantly, as Chassidus puts it, to reveal the deeper meaning behind that helam, behind that concealment. This is especially explained in the Maimorim of Nachamu, Tofresh Ayin Eter from the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe is Fabrengens and Maimorim said on Hachnasas Orchim more than any of the Rabbeim ever said on Hachnasas Orchim specifically, elaborates at length at this point. So the 15th of Av carries in a tremendous energy because it's carrying the black hole energy of the Tzimtzum energy, inverted negative energy on a revealed level of Tisha B'Av. And the intensity that comes out of that is far greater than all the 15th of Avs. And comparable to Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is exactly the same thing. What makes Yom Kippur such a special day? Because Yom Kippur came the second luchas, the second tablets, after what? After the fall. The first tablets were given on Shavuos, on the 7th of Sivan, when Matan Torah happened. Then what happened was 40 days and 40 nights Moshe Rabbeinu was on Mount Sinai. Then he comes down, he sees that they built a golden calf. Literally total violation, total betrayal, total mutiny against the divine commandment. Do not build false gods. Do not worship false gods. And what happens then? He breaks the tablets, only to go back on the mountain for another 40 days. Comes back to Rosh Chodesh, unsuccessful, beseeching God for forgiveness. And then goes a third time to Rosh Chodesh, the different opinions. The first day, Rosh Chodesh, the second day. And when does he come down the second time? That is on Yom Kippur. It's actually the third time, because the first time was in Shavuos B'Tammuz, Chet HaEgel. Then came the Rosh Chodesh, the second time, the third time Yom Kippur, and this time with the second tablet, Salachti Kidvarecha. God, Hashem says, God says, I have forgiven them as you have requested. Moshe prevails. So Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year because the second luchas, and even though ostensibly they come after the break, the literal break of the first tablets, but the greatness that they carry is that it's a repair after a break is always more powerful because it shows the profound love that nothing can break it. Like the halacha, the law that says that if somebody, let's say, makes a contract with you, and then there's shtar sheyotzo lov irur, somebody claims the contract is not valid, and it's upheld in court after an appeal, then you can no longer be ma'arid, you no longer can appeal it, you no longer can question it. Even though the appeal was painful, the fact that someone's even questioning there's an agreement and the agreement is valid, but because they question and it's upheld, The upholding makes it even stronger than it was originally, because originally you could still challenge it. Now you can't challenge it anymore, because it shows that it went through fire and water, and through every challenge, and it's still withheld. That means it can endure anything. And that's the power of the period we are in, which is so relevant to the Chassidus Applied theme. And that is that no matter what a person has gone through life, no matter what your personal Tisha B'Av is like, no matter how sad, no matter how much was broken, and much was broken. The temple was broken, the tablets were broken, 17th of Tammuz, but also in the same period. So many things were broken physically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and yet we have just a few days afterwards comes the 15th of Av, a full moon. You look up at the moon, same moon that we see now, was the same moon they saw then, and you realize there's hope that you can repair no matter anything. And that's why it's such a powerful holiday. And actually, it leads 15 days later to the month of Elul, Chassidus Orchim, the month when Moshe Rabbeinu prevailed finally, and ultimately culminating with Rosh Hashanah, when Moshe is still on the mountain, and finally Yom Kippur. So when you look at it from that perspective, the calendar carries within it a message that is so relevant. You don't need to go to a therapist for this. You don't need to go to a psychiatrist. You don't need pills. You don't need any type of intervention. Just open up a calendar, look up into the sky, and you have yourself the message of all messages of what it means to grow, to maintain hope, to maintain betachon, to realize that we are unbreakable, and the spirit is as resilient as it gets. And not only that, we get stronger, because that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So all the themes and concepts that you hear about healing is literally carried in our eternal calendar that goes back thousands of years. And that is why also on Tu B'Av, as the Rebbe emphasizes, with all the different reasons that the Gemara explains, is also the day when the nights begin to get longer and the days shorter in the summer months in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, as the Gemara in Tainus concludes, and therefore as the nights get longer, and Lo Yivra Laila El Legis, a night was created, essentially the somberness, the silence, the quiet of the night is very conducive for more learning Torah. And that's why it's as it's brought down in Allah, it's time to start learning and extra learning. But this isn't just incidental. It's connected directly, because once you go through a period where there was a down, so to speak, and now you go to an up, you have to do things to maintain this high. And maintaining is the learning Torah, which is Eirech Yomim, which is Torah reflects on Chayenu ve'Eirech Yemenu, our life and our sustenance, and Kol Demandim Yesif, the Yarech Yomim, that you continue as the nights get longer, we increase in learning Torah, which increases in life, spiritual life, and even physical life. So we have a directive as well in this period of time. So there you have the general lesson of this Tkufa, of this period, in personal terms. Just a cross-reference, I've discussed this in previous years as well, in episodes 30 and episode 77, episode 128. We're now already in the third year of MyLife, Chassidus Applied, so themes that have been discussed, obviously have been discussed in the past, different angles, and as this is a good opportunity to refer you to our landing page where you find the full MyLife resources, meaningfullife.com/MyLife, previous episodes, archives, obviously the forum where you could submit your questions and comments, and many other resources there, including all the essays, and it's easy to find through search. The videos are time-stamped, so you can access what you're looking for. We also are in this week, the next Shabbos will be Chof Av, which is the 73rd yahrzeit of the Rebbe's father, Hagon HaChassid, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. And we all know that the Rebbe, and personally you could have seen the anguish of the years that he was not able to serve his father in Kibbud Av, as well as Kibbud Eim. But his mother finally, the Rebbe reunited with her in Tafshin Zayin in a few years, 3 years after the Rebbe's father passed away in Alma Ata, in Golis in Russia. And the Rebbe every year would have a Fabrengen Chof Av. In the early years would always make a siyum. He always made a siyum, but in the early years it was only a siyum. But it became a Fabrengen, the Rebbe honoring Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. And we have, even though he had written a tremendous amount of Torah, we only have little remaining. And that when it came to New York, it finally arrived the manuscripts in the early 60s. And throughout the 60s, the Rebbe published it in a series called Lekut Levi Yitzchak, Teres Levi Yitzchak. And then at the end of the 60s, the Rebbe began to explain every Shabbos. He would discuss a piece from his father, first on his father's commentary on Tanya, the Geras HaTshuva, then his father's commentary on the Zohar, and until later years of the late Mems, it became part of the custom that every Shabbos, when the Rebbe would speak a Rashi Sikha, would always be a beer, something explanation in his father's Torah, in addition to the summer months, the Pirkei Avos, and later years Rambam. So it was a mainstay to show the chshivus of it personally, but it also opened up the beauty, and you could say the poetry of Lekut Levi Yitzchak, in the sense of how the symmetry of how he explains ideas. And just to give just a little overview, because it's Chof Av, and the Rebbe asks in letters and in sichos that we should learn something connected to the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, I'll just give one little piece where he talks about himself. Personally, it's a very personal and very intimate. And you see also a man who looked at everything in his life through the eyes of Torah, through the eyes of Kabbalah, through the eyes of Chassidus. As the Rebbe's father writes to him, that whenever he says something, it's always good to connect it to Kabbalah, because then it makes it kafter v'ferach. Kafter v'ferach is an expression from the Menorah that means it's beautifully, perfectly eloquent. It's a loose translation. And so the Rebbe's father has a Rishima where he writes about his years in Golos. And he connects it to his name and to the time period, and even the cities that he sat in prison, all connected to the fact that Levi and Yitzchak, the Rebbe's father's name, are all Gvuras. Levi is in Kava Gvura, Kava small. Yitzchak is Gvura. And he explains how the Hey Gvuras of the 5 years he sat in one place and the 5 months in another. You could see it's printed in the beginning of his Rishimas, the Rebbe's father's Rishimas on Tanya. But it's fascinating to see. It's fascinating. It's also painful, I should say, to see, first of all, what he suffered, but how he saw in it all the divine hand, but not only the divine hand of beauty, the divine hand of Gvura. And as I said regarding the 15th of Av and the 9th of Av, Gvura, we all know, carries in it, Gvuras Mumatokas carries it in a power of even deeper chesed. Like Chassidus speaks about Chsadim Nistarim, that in Gvura, in the concealment, in the withholding, and in the discipline, you can often find, and even in the severities, you can find even a deeper love than in Chesed Gali, in revealed love, which is of course fitting to this period in time. The Rebbe also mentions that on the 20th of Av, in some Sfarim it says, it's 40 days before Rosh Hashanah, 10 days to the Chodesh El, and then 30 days of El. So it refers to that Aboyim Yem Kedim Yitziras Avlad, 40 days before the birth of a child, you announce things, including the Shidduch and so on. So in a way, Chof Av is also the beginning of like the birthing of Rosh Hashanah. And I don't recall that Rebbe actually explained the reasoning behind it, but he did explain from the Gemara in Tainus that Chof Av is also mentioned regarding the Korban Eitzim. There was a special korban brought, actually a korban, even though all korbanos, there's eitzim, there's wood that was fuel for the fire, but there was actually a korban eitzim as well. They brought an offering of eitzim, and there was one family that brought it on Chof Av. And the Rebbe connects it to that as well, and Avedis Hashem, it's in Lekut Sichos, you can look it up. Bottom line is, this period in time, as I said, is all leading up to and gives birth to the greatest days of the year, which is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hoshana Rabbah, El, and preceded by El, which is why Rosh Hashanah says that Aryeh, which is the mazel of the month of Av. Aryeh is the Rosh Tevis. Aryeh is Aleph, Resh, Yud, Hey. It's an acronym for El, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah is like the siyum, the chesim of all these events. Well, it's all born from what? From Aryeh, which seems odd. How could it be that such a negative thing? And the month of Av gives birth to El, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hoshana Rabbah. Exactly right. Because in Jewish thought, and we see life not as fragmented pieces, we see them all part of one cycle. So even the descents are basically a dip in order to lead and part of a wave. So if you look at life as pieces, as fragmented pieces, every piece is where it is. But if you look at it as a journey, like think of it a cardiogram, then it's like this. That's how it works. There are peaks and there are valleys, and there's one flow, it's one narrative, and you have to see things through, using the spiral staircase analogy of the Schwindeltreppe of the Baal Shem Tov. The Schwindeltreppe means swindling staircase, because like a swindling staircase, it's one journey, but the journey sometimes takes you, that you see that your back is facing the destination. And we have to see it through and understand that it's all part of one story and one narrative. Okay. Chof Av is also discussed in previous episodes, in episodes 78 and 128. Now, this is a perfect segue to lead us into the first question I'm going to talk about. And that is, how does one navigate the turbulence of life and remain above the fray? How to survive the ups and downs of life? So here again, cross-referencing it to episodes 39 and 60, where similar questions were asked, and I addressed it then. Obviously, there's also overlap, so let us address. Life has its turbulence, and we're expected to weather the storms. How does Chassidus help us navigate the ups and downs of life? Hi, one person writes. I hear Rabbi Jacobson is asking for requests for topics. I would very much like if he could address the topic of how to survive the ups and downs of life. Would you kindly suggest as a topic for him to talk about? Thank you so much. Best wishes. Yes, this is in response to my ongoing request for topics, issues you'd like to address, personal issues, whatever it is that you want to talk about. So, and the truth is, I just really answered it at length with using the calendar, the Hebrew calendar, as that journey, the cycle of ups and downs, but I'll just add a few more points. Let's use the analogy of a swimmer. Though this analogy is not brought in Chassidus, but it's, I think, a good analogy that captures a lot of themes of Chassidus. And that is the swimmer. A good swimmer, what distinguishes a good swimmer from a not such a good swimmer, is not that a good swimmer can swim through any storm or through any difficulty. Exact opposite. A good swimmer knows when to thrust forward and when to let go. Because if you see a very strong tide coming your way, or a storm, or turbulence, sometimes at that point it's better to just allow yourself to just float and be carried by the tide instead of fighting it. A swimmer that does not have experience will think, you know what, I'll just push it through. And obviously gets exhausted and can't continue. So the key to good swimming, the key to all journeys in life is navigation. Knowing how to navigate the twists and turns, the ups and downs. There's inevitably going to be in every person's life, more than once, even on a maybe daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it is, and not necessarily even scheduled, times where you have a certain lull, a certain down, whatever it may be, either for reasons you can identify or reasons you can't identify. What do you do then? So someone who's not experienced will say, you know what, let me just fight it through. Listen, if you could do that and not lose your strength, great. But there are times where you can't. There are times you just have to realize this is a period, maybe it's a time to take stock, to accountability, review, watch the mistakes you've made. It's a time to step back. Maybe let it all seep through you. And then there are times where you have the motivation or the energy, where you see it's easier, and that's when you're supposed to forge ahead. I remember, just to use a little humorous analogy, I was once giving a class, and there were seltzer bottles on the table. And of course, one person who was must have been quite thirsty, I don't know how desperate he was, but he was definitely thirsty, opens the bottle, and instead of ending up the bottle in a cup, ended up all over him. Sprayed all over. So though I had a topic to talk about, I decided let's discuss the secrets of opening up a seltzer bottle and its lessons in our lives. That the key is this, that when you open up the bottle, because there's pressure, the key is to turn twice and once back. So slowly you allow that pressure out. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And what's the lesson in life? The lesson in life is it's not always important to just keep turning and opening it. Sometimes that can be too overwhelming. Also, 1 step forward and 1 step back, you end up going nowhere. The key is that when you're in the mode where you can move forward, the thrust ahead, always make sure that when you're going forward, do 2 steps for every 1 step, every setback. That way you're always going to be ahead of the game. That's the key to navigation. Look at nature. Look at the seasons. How the trees go into hibernation during the winter, come to life and begin to spring forth and blossom in the spring. In the summer, a full glory. In the fall, the leaves begin to fall as the trees begin to recede and go back into their sleep for the winter. There's a cycle to life. Look at the heartbeat. I mentioned the cardiogram. It's not a straight line, God forbid. It's a wave, peaks and valleys. You don't want extreme peaks, you don't want extreme valleys, you want balance. But life by definition is mobile. Life by definition is movement. And understanding that movement and navigating with it is the key to success. Fighting it is the key to failure. So by riding those waves, that's what you want to do. You don't want to fight those waves. You want to ride those waves. And when it's going high, by all means, go with it. But when it gets a little more difficult, some things you need to fight because it's a challenge for you to overcome. But there are many times you need to, at that point, is go with the wave as well. You don't always have to fight and do everything to drain your own resources. So it's a matter of navigation. In the language of Chassidus is basically the famous story with Rav Meir Mishlan. When you're tied above, you don't fall below. That means even when you're on slippery slopes, as the story goes, but you're tied above, you're connected, so you're able to navigate. And navigation is critical to the whole process. Often we need to have we always need to have a good mashpia, a good rav, a good objective friend or mentor that can help us determine that, because sometimes you may decide it's a time for you to lay low. It really may be a time for you to move forward. Sometimes the other way around. Sometimes it's important for you to lay low and not move forward. It's critical to have a good sounding board and good advice to balance out our blind spots and our own biases and prejudices and preconceived notions. So that's the answer to the question. And finally, I will say, besides the mentor, the fact that if you're around people who know how to navigate, they help you navigate. I remember early in my career, so to speak, writing career, I remember I was trying to write something and it was extremely, extremely difficult. I did not feel I had the confidence that I can get through it. I remember a very experienced writer came to me and told me, he saw me frustrated, he said to me, remember this, writing is always going to be difficult. The only difference is, in years ahead, you'll know that you can do it. It's like running a marathon. First time, can I really do this? But once you do it, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy next time, but you have a certain measure of confidence that you can navigate through it. And you have to know that there are times that you're going to have confusion. That's how it is. Creativity is a child of confusion. And the more the creativity, the more the breakthrough, usually the more the confusion that precedes it. That's the order. In the language of Chassidus, yesh, ayin, yesh. Chassidus says every metamorphosis, every real growth that's worth mentioning, is basically a process of a yesh, of a state of being. If it's going to grow into another state of being, it has to go through a void, a vacuum, like the caterpillar that goes into the chrysalis, into the cocoon, and then it's reborn as a butterfly. So yesh, ayin, yesh. Everything goes through this process. And if it doesn't go through the process, it's probably still the original yesh. Because if you haven't shed an old layer of skin, you're not going to assume a new layer of skin. That's the process of life. And recognizing that it's steps in a process is the key. Because it can become very demoralizing and very overwhelming when you just see the skin being shed. You say, 1 second, what's going to happen next? It's like seeing the egg cracking, and then you realize, 1 second, if I wait a few seconds, I see the chick emerge. Everything works that way. If you don't wait it through, you say it's just a crack. And many people think, okay, that's it, it's over. No. Process. Understanding the process. A seed deteriorates in the ground. You see it through, and you'll see the beautiful sapling that will emerge, that will ultimately blossom into a plant or a tree or a flower and grow into full maturity. Everything goes through these steps. Unfortunately, we live in a time of instant gratification, which just compounds that temptation that we all have is, I want to see it already. Not to see things through. There's a process. We have to respect the process and respect the emergence of things. You cannot force a flower out of the ground. You water it, you nurture it, you weed it, and then you see results. And the same thing is in our own personal growth. Ups and downs are all part of one process. I know it's easy to say, when you're in the emotional state of mind where you feel depressed or you feel down, it's hard to see it that way. That's why it's important to prepare in the years of plenty for the years of famine, as Yosef HaTzadik taught us all, that brilliant wisdom that he taught us in looking at a picture, look at it when you're in a healthy mode, then when it gets difficult, you're already prepared, you preempted, you preventive medicine is the best. It's very difficult to tell somebody who's in a very difficult place and say, hey, this is just a process. You still have to say that, but it's harder to hear. Okay. The next question, which again is the spirit of this period in time, when is it the Yetzer Hara and when is it my physical limits? Everybody has a breaking point. Everyone reaches a place where he feels like he's overexerting himself or herself. Yet, we're always taught that anything that stands in the way of us accomplishing our positive and Torah-based goals is merely a tactic of the Yetzer Hara. How do I know if my resistance and inhibition is coming from my Yetzer Hara, or is it actually my physical limits telling me to take it easy and relent before collapsing? Another person writes, thinking back to my days in yeshiva, there were times when during the day I would become drowsy and nod off, be it in Zal or a shir. I always wondered if is this just the Yetzer Hara trying to get me, and that this is the quintessential moment of iskafia, which means I should put effort to refrain from falling asleep and concentrating and learning? Or is it possible sometimes the limited physicality that we exist as has just reached a limit and I really need to get some sleep? Was men tor nicht, tor men nicht. Was man meg, darf man nicht. Which means that which you're not allowed. And even that which you're permitted, you also shouldn't do. So is it when you are tired after working all day and want to go to sleep just the Yetzer Hara fighting you? Or is using hot water for a shower just giving into a taiva? Cold water is simply unpleasant. Does physicality ever fall into the category of osman muz, with that which you must? Okay, excellent question. And I don't know if there's a one-piece formula that will answer this question, because we're all subjective, and it could be Yetzer Hara is convincing you that maybe it's a physical limit. That can also be from the Yetzer Hara. It's a great teret, it's a great excuse. That's where it comes into play very much, the Aseh L'charav, having an objective teacher, mentor, mashpia, that can help determine in each case if you can't determine it yourself. So let's start with a few things. First of all, there's no question there's been a shmarta me'edla nafshe sechem, a halacha and teira, a mitzvah and teira. You have to watch your health. So to do things that are destructive to your health, for example, a person should stay up night after night and say skafia, should learn and learn and learn and learn to the point of a breaking point. I think most of us would agree that's not acceptable. Is there an exception that someone can reach that place? Where does it say in Torah you're supposed to? Torah says you can't. A human being can't physically go without sleep for 3 days, or whatever the periods that are. So different opinions on the matter. Same thing with food and drink. A person has to eat and drink. As a matter of fact, if you don't, it could cause you not to be able to do Torah mitzvahs properly, and which is one of the reasons that the Rebbe writes in Ageres HaTshuva, not once but twice, that we don't do today's sigufim, which is afflictions, self-affliction and oppressions, and different ways of panicking, of hurting yourself, because today we don't have the strength for that. Besides the Yerushalayim issues, it's a different time period. And on the contrary, the Rambam brings about Mashiach, the Laman Sava. Why did the Chacham desire Mashiach? Because they wanted to have the peace of mind that they can learn Torah. So having Medarkei Havedus Hashem, as the Rebbe says in Hilchos Deis, is to have a guf body, to have a healthy body. The Magid's Torah, a small hole in the body is a big hole in the neshama. So overall, there are Torah and halachas that talk about what a person should do, anything that is detrimental to health, v'chai b'hem, live by it and be healthy. That's a general statement. Now, in that sense, let's apply this. On the other hand, there are definitely situations where you can convince yourself, I need another hour of sleep, I need to eat a little more. But this is not by necessity, this is already because you want to do it. And very often we can distinguish ourselves. If you can't, talk to someone about it. In the case that you're describing, you fall asleep in the middle of a shir and so on, it could be the night before you didn't sleep properly. So right now, you're supposed to be learning, so maybe you do have to be misgaber and be more stronger of yourself. And after school, after yeshiva, go to sleep a little earlier. I mean, let's be practical. There's a famous story with Yisrael Nevler, which I don't know how much it applies here, but it's a Geshmak Emaise, that the Rebbe Rashab told him he should stay up Thursday night, Mishmer, to learn. Now, to stay up Thursday night, sometimes he needed a little achana, as he put it. So Thursday afternoon, he would sometimes go for a dremel to get a little nap. The Frierdiker Rebbe would take meticulous attendance in Temchet Mim, and he would review it with the Rebbe Rashab, and they see that every few Thursdays they see that Rabbi Yisrael Nevler is not there. So Rebbe Rashab called him in, and he said, Yisrael, my hi, what's this? So he said, the Rebbe said to stay up Thursday night, and I'm all daf machen achonis. Sometimes you have to make preparation to stay up. So Rebbe Rashab said to him, was meinst du Yisrael? Afun schlafen kann man kommen zu nicht schlafen? What do you think? That from sleeping is a achana to not sleeping? So in that case, the Rebbe Rashab saw in him that he has the capacity to stay up Thursday night, and to go to sleep a little early was not the kavanah. Is this for everyone? Not necessarily. There's another story they tell, one of the Raskins, who used to go always say Tinga Chatzos, which is at midnight time, to a certain prayer for the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Once he fell asleep and he came to the Rebbe Rashab saying that something he did every night. The Rebbe Rashab looked at him with incredulous and said, "Wie kommt es? As I eat nicht kein Balabos of sein eigener Körper." How is it possible? He's so shocked that Aid is not Balabos, he does not control his own body. Meaning, how could you have fallen asleep? So, whether this was because he was at Madrega or because the Rebbe Rashab was eliciting that power, the fact of the matter is that besides what I said at the outset, and this doesn't negate it in any way, that you have to do what is necessary, a pialocha, healthy, and so on, there is an element that a person can have a certain type of, if he sets his mind to control over his body, that he should not succumb to the natural things. And there are times that you need to do that. There are times that we're up at night, whether it's Shayna Rabbah, whether it's Shavuos, whether it's Shvius Shal Pesach. There are times we were by Fabrengens, it wasn't that easy, you got tired, you're hungry. There are fast days. There are times where you need, the Torah itself expects, either halacha or b'minig, that you should control yourself. But on an ongoing basis, God forbid to do things that are detrimental to health, absolutely not. That, on the other hand, to work on yourself, that you could be a more disciplined person, and maybe yes, maybe not completely lose sleep, but sometimes learn a little more, a little effort, case by case, that's the aved of a person. That's what we do, is try to acclimate our bodies and refine it more and more. Like the Chassidim that in ways did things to not give in to their bodily needs so that they can, there's also a Avot Chassidus, that Avot Chassidus, an idea of Chassidus should be able to penetrate. Because the fact is, we do have chemer haguf, we have crass bodies that have needs, and I'm not even talking about anything prohibited, but sometimes indulging more than necessary. So there's a balance that's necessary here, and you can't always know immediately which one is coming from. You have to always assume the Yetzer Hara definitely is using every ploy possible to get you not to do what you're supposed to be doing, or to do things you shouldn't be doing. But that doesn't mean that the health shouldn't be preserved. So generally you could see the distinction. If not, you ask an objective party. I'm summing up what I've said, and let me see if I covered everything. And recognizing that, yes, and sometimes we do have to push the limits of our physical bodies. Not over push it and not extremes, but sometimes a little more discipline in this area and that area that a person can grow. And that too done in a way that's commensurate to everyone's particular aveda and capacity. For example, there's some people who are stronger and stronger-willed, so obviously for them they can do more. Others are either where they're more feeble or weak or they're ill. So clearly that the Torah does not expect a person like that to be trying to break their body even further, God forbid. And there's the concept, chulsha de gufa tukfa de nishmasa. A weaker body makes for a stronger soul. A stronger soul makes for a weaker body, but not in contradiction to the Maggid's word. A small hole in the body is a big hole in the soul, because the body is part of Avedis Hashem. The Eibishter wants a guf body, he wants a healthy body, he wants a guf kodesh, gufa de lehen kadishin. The body should also be permeated with Torah mitzvahs, not just the soul, and never the soul at the expense of the body, which is another additional point that I should make, that the body is part of the kavanah. It's not just along for the ride and you're going to ignore it, but like the Baal Shem Tov's Torah, Ozev Tazev Imei, that you actually have to help it and transform it, because the body is a partner with the soul. So that makes an additional element of getting the body to participate, but to participate not on the body's terms, on the soul's terms. So there is the element of educating and training and acclimating the body to be more conducive, to be the proper vehicle for the neshama. And that for sure is not coming from the Yetzer Hara, because the Yetzer Hara wants the body to control the neshama, not the other way around. Which is yet another litmus test, so to speak, when you look at what is the result. If the result of breaking your body is that the body is going along and helping the neshama do its service in a way that's a healthy way, that's great. If it's breaking the body that is in a way that weakens your avodah, that also could be from the Yetzer Hara, who wants to weaken your body, and that way, b'chlal, you're in a weaker state, and a weaker person is going to serve God in a weaker way. So we are here about having a sound body, and a sound soul and a sound body. Shoma beguf, as the Rebbe Rashab once rolled up his sleeve and showed his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, he says, Zevi Tayer. Look how precious is the human body that the whole Eibishter poured out mitzvahs for this body, meaning the body, the mitzvahs, and so many of them connected to our physical bodies. Okay, next question. Proof of God's existence. Should we try to prove God's existence? Okay. How does Chassidus approach the issue of proving God's existence? Do we try to prove it? Can we prove it? Are there any airtight proofs? Or are we trying to understand a concept by touching it with our hand, applying our limited logic to something way beyond the empirical world? Okay, very good question. When you look in Torah in general, and including Chassidus, you don't find anywhere a Maimer Chassidus or a Pasuk in Torah or Maimer Chazal that sat down and said, let's prove God's existence. Interestingly, the first Pasuk in Chumash, Bereishis is bara Elokim es hashamayim v'haaretz, a statement of fact, an axiom, a muskodish. It doesn't say, let's first look at the world and figure out all the different reasons and arguments that a God exists. It just states it. That itself is a lesson. And you don't have Maimorim, you don't have Sichas, or anything that the Rabbeim sat down and said, okay, since God is invisible, or we can't see God, and there are people who argue, does a question whether God exists, let's go into a discussion. Not even once you see that. You see it in letters from the Rebbe. You see it in the Svarim and the Sifrei Chkira of the Ikrim and the Mer Nevuchim and the Kuzri and others that talk about it to people who ask that question. But you don't find in Torah the Chatchila, not in Torah Shebeksav, not in Torah Chazal. You have allusions here and there, you have a moshel, you have things like that, but you don't see it as a focus, because you'd think that should be the first thing. Before we go into anything, let's establish that God exists, especially according to the opinion whether Emunah B'Hashem is a mitzvah. That some Chassidic brings the different Meini HaMitzvahs, those that count the mitzvahs. Some argue it's not a mitzvah. Why? Because without accepting the mitzvah mitzvah, what's the point of saying it's a mitzvah? To say Emunah Hashem is a mitzvah would suggest that you already accept the mitzvah. So if you don't yet accept it, then so you need to have that axiom. So what's the reasoning behind it? The reasoning behind it is, if you think about it, they're very brilliant, beyond brilliant, because there's certain things that proofs are simply not sufficient. Not to say there aren't proofs for God's existence. There are many proofs, and we'll talk about it in a moment. But to say that it's built on proofs leaves a lot of holes. Because let's start with the most important question, philosophical question. Who created logic in the first place? God did. So the whole idea of proofs is based on logic that God created. So you're going to use a creation of God's to prove the creator exists, the creator of that logic. Or to put it in more blunt terms, would you really want a God that's the product of your mathematical equations? A God that is essentially a product of your empirical observation, your logic, and so on? Then you have a God that's on your terms. The whole point of God is the opposite. That you're a piece of the whole, a part, and God is the entirety. Can the part prove the entirety? We're only a piece of it. Or the Moshe the Rebbe gives in so many letters, like a little child trying to understand a profound scientist. I'm not talking about understand God's ways. Even the mere fact, if God is to be anything that's significant, it has to be a God that's beyond us and created us and our logic, not the other way around. So it's actually a oxymoron to prove God's existence, because proof itself is a creation. In addition, you can make the argument that God created an agnostic universe. The famous Gemara, when Moshe asked Hashem, why does it say, Nasa Adam, B'tzalmeinu kudmusenu, Nasa Loshen Rabim, let us create a human being in our image? And Moshe says that it gives room to all those that will say that there's a partnership, a shituf. God forbid. The Eibishter answer is a classic answer. What does that mean? Those that want to make a mistake shall make a mistake. Why do it in a way you're building it in that people should make such a mistake? That they don't have to make such a mistake, but that's possible. The answer is because that's not because Hashem is just playing a game, God forbid. He created the universe in such a way that aretza litisita. And you know the doctrine of tzimtzum addition from the Arizal. The tzimtzum is a component that allows for existence and independent existence to emerge. How is that possible? In the omnipresence and omnipotence of Ein Sof HaMamala Kol HaMetzias in the language of the Eitz Chaim. Only divine consciousness. Where's there room for an independent entity? So the Tzimtzum solves that anomaly. But by definition, the Tzimtzum is a concealment of the divine conscious unity to allow the possibility for an independent entity, which allows for the possibility ultimately, after Ribu Yishtalshlus and Pasois and Mesochim v'chulu v'chulu, for Haretzelitisita, that a person can make a mistake. In other words, a universe that's agnostic, where you could argue that God exists and someone could argue not because it's concealed. So the Torah, avoiding all this, doesn't go into start making proofs. It says it's a given. It's a given, an axiom that God exists. God created heaven and earth. Additionally, you can say, because from a Torah point of view, besides the fact that if it's not a given, proofs itself are not going to be sufficient, because for every proof you could have another question, there's another element. That it's common, maminim b'nei maminim, is inherent in the human, in the Jewish soul. You could even say in the human being, because it's a simple thing, which is ein davar eises atzmei, which is one of the proofs. The Torah doesn't say it, it says in the Sfarim. Nothing can create itself. So the mere fact that there's existence immediately testifies that there is a creator of existence. A book testifies to an author. A musical composition testifies to a composer. A piece of art testifies to an artist. A building testifies to an architect. So why would we say that a universe, which is more beautiful than any, more powerful and profound than any book, and more beautiful than any piece of music, and more eloquent than any piece of art, and more structured than any building, does not have a creator? So I remember when I was younger, I used to say to myself, I don't know, for some reason this proof didn't resonate with me. As you get old, you start thinking, 1 second, it's an excellent proof. What's the refutation? It's true that the atheists of our times, quote unquote, if there's such a thing, say that you don't need to have God to explain the beauty and the symmetry and the poetry of existence. But they don't say you can't have God. They say you don't need it. They call it natural selection. That nature itself figures out how to adapt. Well, you know something? They want to call it that. Maybe that's just God's way of implanting in the nature that wisdom that they can adapt. But again, everybody can choose. They can choose as they see fit. The Chassidus Yontif is a very interesting Chassidus Yontif that says, on the famous question that the philosophers asked Rabbi Akiva, if God didn't want Avodah Zarah, why didn't he destroy the sun and the moon? So there wouldn't be sun worshippers and moon worshippers. And what did Rabbi Akiva say? Because of the fools, God will destroy his world. So the Chassidus Yontif, the commentator on the Mishnah, says, 1 second, why didn't they follow up? Why didn't God destroy the shaitim, the fools? And the answer is because of bchira. Free will. Again, those that want to make a mistake, make a mistake. So the proof of creator, a creation testifies to a creator, a book testifies to an author, is a very logical proof. Why do so many people reject it? So here's my own little theory. I haven't seen it anywhere, because of the implications. Someone tells you that this building was built by an architect, or this book was written by an author. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Why not? But let's say they told you that if this book was written by an author, every time you read a word, you need to change your life and become a more ethical person. I guarantee you, then we start having a biased reason. 1 second, maybe no one wrote this. Remember, a God has implications. I always tell this to scientists I know. I say, you always say that religious people are just blind and biased and they just believe without, and they should just say that they're just believers and make that statement that they just believe, nothing will change their belief. Why don't you also make a disclaimer that your statement that God does not exist or you doubt God's existence, you also have vested interest in that. You know what your interest is? Because then you're not accountable. Who wants to be accountable? So in other words, it's not that the proof doesn't work. The proof has implications. A building or a artist or a music or the other examples I gave before, there are no implications. But the implication that I have to be accountable, that I have to wake up in the morning and perhaps answer to this God, and I have to live a life of moral life and ethical life, and I can't just give in to every temptation. That is a very serious bias. That's a very serious vested interest. So you have to recuse yourself and say, listen, I can't be completely objective. And I'm not arguing that religious people are, believers are. Everybody has to make a statement. I grew up with this, and therefore I'm invested. I have interest in the results of this conclusion. And my interest may be that I believing in God serves me well, and someone else's interest is not believing in God serves me very well. So when you see it in that context, you see that making a proof can just be a vicious cycle where people can just hide behind the proof and say, I have a different question, and you can, or using, in other words, it becomes something that's endless. The turbulence wisdom simply says God exists. If you want to have proofs, think about it. But I'm not going to waste time and spend time to prove it, because you could spend your whole lifetime before you get to what God wants of you. So the Torah right away begins and cuts straight to the chase. And same thing with Chassidus. Are there proofs? Yes, there are. There are proofs. If you look, for example, there's a whole Sefer Achkira from the Samach Tzedek, but it's not, so to speak, it's part of the body of Chassidus, but it's not what we learn on our regular basis. This was the vikuchim, the debates he had in Peterburg with the Maskilim and others. So he wrote it because you need to have like Meir Nevuchim, for the perplexed. So we have, if you need to have answers, there are answers. But it's not based, a person's life is not based on proof. And I would submit this, that most people's decisions in life are not based on logical proofs. Yes, logical proofs are good for science and good for medicine and good for different arguments and debates. But life, most decisions are made based on emotional and cultural and social factors. Now, intelligent person, those factors are also informed by intelligence. Now, there's a lot more to say on this topic. There's also a letter from the Rebbe that he talks about this. A letter dated Hei Shvat Tavshin Lamed Zayin. And talks about the Kuzri. So if anybody's interested in this letter, again, just email us with your email address and we'll send you the letter. It's a very interesting letter about scientific proofs of God. Are they debatable or they're not? And some of the things that I said are based on this letter. About the need or no need for proof of God's existence. Again, a letter of Hei Shvat Tov Shalom Zayin in English. Okay. Let me move to the next question. Maybe I'll read parts of this letter the next episode. I see some things I did want to point out. But due to time, we'll do that as a follow-up. Right now, I want to move to the next question called toxic guests. Oh, by the way, proof of God's existence I also discussed in episode 112. So toxic guests, and here's the question. Hachnasas Orchim in a safe home, when is it too much? How to protect your family while keeping an open home. So the questioner asked like this: how to protect our families while maintaining an open house, an open home. Excuse me. Having an open home no doubt brings tremendous amounts of blessing. It also opens the door to all kinds of relationships, wanted and unwanted, healthy and unhealthy. No one is asked for their credentials, mental health status, or criminal records when you're invited for a meal, and this can create unpleasant situations. How does one have an open home yet ensure that their children aren't exposed to unhealthy or toxic people? If all are welcome, then what can parents do when someone in their home is destructive? Another questioner writes in different words. Firstly, I want to thank you so much for this unbelievable and revolutionary forum. It's a true game changer in many aspects and allows real-life issues to be consolidated and worked upon. My question is, we have pretty much an open door policy for those who need a place for Shabbos, etc. But there's this one woman who we have been having for a long time who's now becoming a serious concern for us. She pushes buttons like no one else. She lacks a filter, says what she wants, believes mostly that her opinion is the only one, has kids but is not married anymore, seems to live in a childish-like mind space where everything is about what the other has. Everything is about what the other has, if they cool, hip, live the high life, etc., has no real sense of boundaries, unfortunately has a reputation for running people the wrong way, and recently we feel a very negative, almost poiteach, Einayim type of feeling when she comes over. On the other hand, she is a single mother, has no real support or a huge amount of friends, is very needy emotionally. We haven't minded most of her issues until recently, and where she starts making things more personal and almost in a cursing, negative, satanic demeanor. it has really started affecting us. The question is, when is it okay to not allow these people into our homes and on lives, especially when she's part of the community and will not miraculously go away? Is it ever okay? Or she Alamed Vovnik or Eliyahu Navi coming dressed up to help us in the world? It's hard to know. It's so hard to know. I've really struggled, and she makes me so angry and frustrated, but I keep telling myself that she's in the world for a good purpose. But now it's actually affected my health. So in a nutshell, when is enough enough, or is it never enough when it comes to our fellow Jew, especially those more vulnerable mentally, emotionally, physically than us? Thanks kindly. Okay, so let me go back to what I said earlier about health, balance between health and the Yetzer Hara. Firstly, boundaries are part of Torah. If somebody is toxic, let's take a simpler question. You know somebody's toxic, and they could have bad impact. Should you invite them to your home with your family there? Generally speaking, if they're going to have a negative impact on your family, you have responsibility to your family as well. Does this mean we completely ignore this person? No, maybe we have to provide for her a place to go where she won't have that impact, or she's with people who are a little more professional and know how to buffer it. So we're not talking about an either-or situation. Do you reject someone like that, or do you welcome them in completely? I think this is a question of boundaries, of healthy boundaries. If you see someone toxic that's having a negative impact on you or anyone, to say, my avodah is to overcome it and be ma'ived on mideisav, not necessarily. It could be that the first thing is chayecha koydmin, protect yourself. Because there can be real consequences. I've seen, unfortunately, bad things with people with good intentions. So there are boundaries, and there's Torah for these things. The Torah tells us when we should be helping people, and what about helping someone who ends up hurting you more than their help? It's not just something purely black and white. Every time you have to help. And help takes on different manifestations. In this particular case with the woman you describe, I would recommend talking through with some people who are professionals and saying, maybe we can find her a place where she could be influenced instead of having such an influence. Especially when dealing with children, I would be far more careful, because children are impressionable. Now, if it's someone that's more innocuous and neutral, they don't have a negative impact, but they're strange a little, it could be a very good lesson for children to be part of. If, again, somebody that may be a little toxic, but does not have a direct impact, and you can buffer it, then again, perhaps yes. But if it affects, since when do you have to compromise one person for another person? And on the contrary, your children come first. So this needs to be measured case by case in every given situation. Now, when it comes to emotional issues or criminal issues, obviously, if somebody's a criminal, somebody's a predator, God forbid, absolutely you don't want them in your home. Doesn't matter. That's not the place where you help people heal them. Heal them. Now, with mental illness, it gets more complicated because we don't want to stigmatize and we don't want to judge anyone, and sometimes people do need compassion. But again, compassion, there are many ways to give compassion. We're not talking about either some people just say, I don't want to have anything to do with that person, or completely come in. Find a balanced place. Find a balanced way. There are people that are really good at this. There are homes where they're very good with dealing with certain people. In other homes, they're not good yet. Boundaries is the key thing to all this, to these questions. I will also say I discussed this in episodes 40 and 155. I'm sure I elaborated on more points there. But this is essentially how I would approach it. Again, case by case, and again, talk to an objective person should you have a question on this matter. I can just tell you from my own personal experience, people come my way, you can imagine, and often when the person I find that is in this category, that's what I do. I weigh. I see if I can be of help. There are people who are so parasitical, and they just so needy, not even necessarily intentional, that you're not helping them. It's like a drowning victim that pulls you down with them. So you have to make a decision to choose your battles, and maybe that person you need to find someone else. I've told people, I don't feel I can help you. They say, no, you're the person, you really help me. I really love coming to speak to you. You really get it, and so on. I really feel that I can help you, and I'll recommend somebody. If they're not willing to go to who I recommend, then you start wondering, am I really of help? Or they just find that I'm a person that's just in a sense, I don't say using me, but just abusing in a sense the time and not going anywhere. And you have to weigh this, because sometimes I feel maybe I'm just getting annoyed, and maybe it's me. Obviously, you need to be very professional about this and very balanced, because you don't want to go one extreme or another. But it's a challenge, and I think all of us have to look at it in that way. And obviously, Yisrael on one hand. On the other hand, what is really helping that person? Because you may not even be helping them by just opening everything up. It could be even hurting them by giving into every whim that they have. Okay. Let us go now. I want to do one follow-up about memory. Last week we spoke about memory, different ways of memory, so I had quite a few comments. I myself have much more to say on the topic, especially being something I did and continue to do. Remember the Fabrengens Chezim. So the one person wrote about memory and referred a very interesting letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe, Chelik Zayin, volume 7 of the Frierdiker Rebbe's letters, page 311. And the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, regarding improving one's memory, like all faculties, it's totally bechizuk hamachshava v'chizuk hamachshava totally ba'adamat. It's totally in strengthening your willpower, your thought, you're strengthening your concentration, I should say, and that's dependent on the person. If a person thinks that they have a weak memory, that thought itself is going to cause them to have a weak memory. If a person thinks that they have a good memory, that itself is going to cause them to have a strong memory. It's an interesting point. I have not seen that anywhere. So in other words, it's about self-confidence, and sometimes you are your own worst enemy by thinking you don't have that good memory. But I would add to that another point that was also shared with me, something I was going to say because I say it many times in my talks on this topic, that memory, I spoke about how to do it, by emptying yourself, absorbing either the Torah Lemivla, when you're busy absorbing, you can't be processing, etc., that there's also, you have to have a passion. There's no question that if you have the respect, when the Rebbe spoke for us, it was like Moshe coming down on Har Sinai and saying a chiddush that you never will hear again. And there's no recordings, and there's no notes. So imagine someone I'll tell you something that's going to change your life, but you can't take notes, and you can't record it. Your adrenaline will go up, and your focus will go up, and your passion, your interest, because it's negated to you. If it's not negated to you, you don't care. Obviously, you're not going to apply yourself. So maybe that's part of also partial explanation of what the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying in this letter. The idea that you have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe, obviously, in the subject matter. He doesn't mention that. And that itself strengthens your memory because you believe you can do it. But there's no question having a passionate connection, not being apathetic to what the person that's speaking or the idea that's being spoken is a key to the whole thing. It has to be important. Additionally, this person writes about a Rebbe a Maimer from the Rebbe 60 years ago, Chof Av, 60 years ago, the Maimer of Chof Av, Shabbos Pasha Ekev, Tovshin Yud Zayin. So there he talks a lot about forgetfulness and memory. Some things that I spoke about last week with Shikha and Golas, because we're now in the period. If Tisha B'Av is the epitome of forgetting, Tu B'Av is the epitome of remembering. And not forgetting, remember I said before about the journey. Remembering it's all part of a journey. Remembering that we're not in one leg of the journey. Because one of the things the Yetzer Hara does, one of the things, the forces that weaken us is when we think we're just here and everything is negative. Understanding that everything is part of a journey is itself remembering your purpose in life and remembering that even the downs are also part of the going up. So shikha is forgetfulness and disconnect, and memory is connection. So that Maimer referring as well, that the Maimer of Chof Av, Tovshin Yud Zayin. I don't have the Dibra Maskell here, but being that it's Chof Av, probably worthwhile, more than worthwhile, learning this Maimer. As a side, I'll mention that this has been suggested by some. People have asked the question. People want to know what kind of Maimorim to learn. People, where do you begin learning Chassidus, from this thing, from that? And he suggested Maimorim. So besides the Chassidus Parsha that the Rebbe says, which is the Parsha in Teira Eir, and Kut Teira Eir, which covers Breishis and Shmois, and the Kut Teira that continues from the end of Shmois and Vayikra, Bamidbar Dvarim, and the Yom Tevim, that there are different Maimorim, and I would love to be able to get and welcome anybody that has any Maimorim you learn that you really think is a worthwhile Maimer to share with others, either because of a particular theme or a particular gishmak or particular insight. So please submit any Maimorim, and I will be happy to share that with others. And this is more like a type of collective grassroots effort to identify key Maimorim or gishmakim Maimorim, important Maimorim to learn, even though every Maimer is important. But sometimes one stands out that is either more fundamental, or answers particular questions, or addresses issues that we are struggling with. Let me go to the Chassidus question, then we'll do the essays. And we'll conclude, yep. The Chassidus question goes like this. Pari Mitzrayim, Amalek, Pari/Mitzrayim, Amalek, and Midian are described by Chassidus in a similar vein. we learn that they are all negative forces representing the ego. Are they all descriptions of the same energy, or do they represent different variations of the ego? Can you please explain the nuances that differentiate one from the other? Well, even though in general terms kelipah, which literally means husks, kelipah is like the shell of or the peel of a fruit. Why is it called kelipah? Because as the Shalah writes, Chassidus cites, because in the beginning of creation it was kelipah shemer lepri. The kelipah with the shell was protecting the fruit. Once you begin to worship, so to speak, and see the peel as an end in itself, it can lead us to all kinds of distortions. So in general, kelipah, as the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Vav in Tanya, that anything that is kedusha means anything that's bottle. Anything in kedusha means it's bottled to elokus. Something not bottled, something that's consumed with itself, that's called yesh. So kedusha and bitl are synonymous. Yesh, ego, and not kedusha are also synonymous. So in general, of course, every kelipah, which means every one of these forces, fray, Amalek, Midian, the Shiva Umes, meaning the 7 nations, Knani and Gergoshi and all those in Eretz Yisrael, Keni, Knizi, and Kadmeni, the 10 or the 7, are all, in general, yes, a kelipah. But just like in Kedusha, there are differences. We see in Tanya, there's 10 keiches of the Nefesh Elokis, and Zelu Uma Ze Asolakim. And counter that, God created a mirror, you can say a parallel universe. In the negative, there's 10 faculties of Nefesh Abamis. So the same thing, that even though overall kelipah and kedusha is bittul telekus and kelipah is the opposite, there is a distinction between them, and they had different names. They lived in different periods, and they manifested different types of snagdus, different types of opposition to the divine and to things that are holy. Chassidus does discuss it. I'll touch it as Moyev as a maimer, a Mittler Rebbe that he said before Rabbi Akiva Eger. He talks about a little about the Sheva Midas, the 7 Midas as they correspond to the Sheva Umes. But when you talk about specifically these, Mitzrayim, fray, and Amalek, and Midian, there are distinctions. Let's talk about a few of them, and I'll give some sources as well. First of all, let's make one thing clear. There's a Maimer, a Pesach Maimer, Pesach Hemshech in Tafshin Tes. It's built on the Hemshech of Tafrei Samach Ches, where he talks about this idea, the different kelipahs that exist. He says that Arizal writes, Kutei Teirel Arizal, not he writes, he said, but Rachav wrote down, Kutei Teirel Arizal Pashti Kiseitze, talks about the Daled Goliath, Bovel, and the others, and concluding with Edom and Yishmael, and how they correspond to different spheres. With the last Goliath, Edom and Yishmael, corresponding to Netzach and Hod. Based, of course, on the book of Daniel, the Cholim of Nebuchadnezzar, where you had that body, and you have part of it gold, and part of it silver, and part of it copper, and part of it bronze, and clay, etc. And the different interpretations. But Mitzrayim is not counted there. So he says, because Mitzrayim is kesed of kelipah, because Mitzrayim, all Goliath Nikrois al Shem Mitzrayim, everything is called a Mitzrayim, because Mitzrayim is Metzidus Yisrael. They made life difficult for Jews. That's a common denominator in all kelipah. Like I said, everything is opposite of Kedusha, opposite of Bittul. But when you break it down, they have different ways that they are menagid. Just like we have vices, we have virtues and vices, like he says at the end of chapter 1 in Tanya, the all different Yusedas, they're different. The Yuseda Eish was connected to Gaiva and Kas, Yuseda Amayim and Taivas, Yuseda Ruach, and Yuseda Ofar, Atzlus and Atzvus, and so on, which is laziness and depression. They're very different negative forces. So Mitzrayim is essentially a central one, which is why Golus Mitzrayim is so fundamental and so central in everyday's davening and Pesach and so on. But it encompasses them all. But in general, Mitzrayim means what? Limitations, inhibitions, constraints. All kelipahs are defined by that. So that's the central. But then when you break it down, so Amalek, for example, Amalek is Gematria Suffolk. So Amalek throws in doubts. Does Mitzrayim also connect that? Of course it has the element when it's a central type of so-called, think of it, your own negative, the negative forces inside of your inhibitions, your fears and insecurities can manifest in many ways. One of them is doubt. That's Amalek. Amalek also has the element of kridus, asher korcha b'derech, apathy, making you cold, cooling you down. Amalek is also gaiva. chutzpah. So you see that there's a particular element, even though in general it's wrong. And remember, when it comes to refining yourself, you can't just refine yourself in general terms. You need to get a specific. The same thing, let's talk about Midian. So the Cholzu in Likutei Torah and elaborated in Ranat, Tafresh Nun Tes from the Rebbe Rashab, Midian from the word modin, machlekes, sinas chinam, divisiveness. Now, can you find that in the others? Yes. But that's more of overlap. Specifically, that's the Milchama with Midian. When you go through each one of these negative forces, the negative archetypes, you can say, they're different archetypes in breaking them down, and you have to focus with the challenges we each have in our given times. We should only know good news now that we're coming from the 9 days, we're going to the 15th of Av and so on and El. That sinas chinam that destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, caused the Beis Hamikdash to destroy. Now avas chinam is our challenge, baseless and unconditional love for one another. With that, let us go to the essays. So there's again 3 essays. Essay number 1, A Fresh World is a Perfect World by Schneier Minkowitz, 27 years old, Shliach Chevy Chase, Maryland. In some way or another, he writes, most if not all negative human thoughts, emotions, and actions stem from one basic weakness that is part of the very fabric of the human condition, our inability to accept that which cannot be changed. And this is a basic cause for sadness, anger, anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. While there are many types of therapies out there aimed at restoring emotional health, it often seems that only the symptoms are being treated while the core of people's troubles will remain with them, no matter how hard they try to move on. In this article, we will attempt to 1, scratch the surface of why it is so hard to accept things we wish did not exist. 2, explore the traditional Jewish approach to dealing with this and why it is limited. 3, explore the contribution that Chassidus has on this topic. And goes through a very interesting, brief but succinct breakdown. Why is it hard to accept which we cannot change? The traditional Jewish approach of Ezu Ashra Sameir Bechelke, who's the wealthy one, the one that is satisfied with his lot, and the contribution of Chassidus that introduces the idea of Hisavas B'chol, that God creates existence from nothing every moment. And comparing them in applying how we deal and cope with things that we cannot change. Very good essay. It can be seen at meaningfullife.com/MyLife, where you see this essay and all the new essays that are posted each week, as well as subscribing to our weekly newsletter, and you get them in your inbox as they're posted. The next one is in Hebrew, Kviyas HaMavteach L'Atzlacha. Kviyas means consistency. Kviyas means establishing something in your life. A mainstay is the secret to success. And does it in a very effective way. This is written by Mendy Ben Harosh, 18 years old, Tzfas, Israel. Kviyas Bizman HaLimud, meaning designating the time of learning. Kviyas Bizman HaTfilah, designated time in davening. Kviyas Benefesh, which is a qualitative, establishing something as a permanent fixture in your life. And goes on how one achieves that with different Maimorim from the Rabbeim, including the Rebbe. And how Kviyas translates and expresses itself in consistency, in persistent consistency, and how that can transform a person's life. No question, it's a critical component in success, because so often our routines trap us, and establishing new so-called permanent fixtures in our lives is a key to changing things. Finally, the third essay is again in Hebrew, Gmila Mergelim B'Keach Chassidus. Freeing ourselves from routines, habits, with the power of Chassidus. 4 steps to break bad habits. 4 steps to break bad habits. Written by Chaya Mushka Goldman, 20 years old. Russia Online School, Menachem, Brooklyn, New York. Talking about habits and routines and patterns, and explaining in a 4-step process with very personal anecdotes, very good examples in real life of how even difficult habits, how we can actually change it with Chassidus. 4 steps. First of all, not underestimating the effect of a habit. Often we dismiss its impact. So really appreciating and not making a mistake in estimating the effect of it. Number 2, an internal introspection of what do I lose when I give in and succumb to my habits. Number 3, the power of will, that decision, that resolution to stop and have it by all costs, including getting ready to get out of your comfort zone. And number 4, target, which is creating a new habit. And on a day-on-day basis until you actually cause change in your life, a change of routine. Again, a very good essay. I commend you for that. And well written. And with that, we will conclude this weekly episode of MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 174. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. It's an honor and pleasure and growthful for me, and hopefully for all of you, to be able to address real life issues that we're struggling with, issues we deal with in the spirit, through the vision, through the eyes of the Rabbeim, through the lens of Chassidus. Everyone have a very blessed week, a Yom Tov Dika week. There was the custom that you begin already benching people, which is Gematria Hachnasas Orchim, starting Hachnasas Orchim. So let me be the first to wish you all to be a Chasiv and a very blessed year, materially and spiritually, and above all, a year of Geula. So until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., everyone have a very blessed week. Thank you very much.